There is more raw, concentrated power packed into the 23 square miles of Manhattan than in most countries on Earth. Not military power, but the power of capital, of ambition, of deals that ripple across the globe. And the thrones of that power aren't in City Hall. They are 1,000-foot-tall steel and glass giants that pierce the sky. We see them on postcards, in movies, on the news. We think we know them. The Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, One World Trade. But the truth is, what we see from the street is a facade, a carefully crafted image. Behind the lobby doors, up on the floors you can't access, lie the real stories. Stories of bitter rivalries, colossal failures, secret technologies, and the hidden machinery that runs the modern world. For the next 10 episodes, we are going inside. We're not just taking the tourist elevator to the observation deck. We are peeling back the curtain on New York City's most iconic commercial buildings to reveal the secrets, the history, and the power they hold. This is the ultimate insider's tour to the structures that built America. And we have to start with the king, the one that, for 40 years, was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The Empire State Building. Today, it's a beloved landmark, a symbol of New York's resilience. But if you were a real estate investor in 1931, you would have called it the single dumbest, most catastrophic investment in the history of the city. Because for the first decade of its life, this icon was a ghost town, a spectacular 1,000-foot-tall failure. To understand why, you have to go back to the Roaring '20s, a time of insane optimism and even more insane egos. The race was on for the title of world's tallest building. Down on Wall Street, the Bank of Manhattan Trust Building at 40 Wall Street was shooting for the sky. In Midtown, auto tycoon Walter Chrysler was secretly building his own Art Deco masterpiece, the Chrysler Building. And then came John J. Raskob. Raskob was a General Motors executive, a classic American self-made man who wanted to make his mark. He teamed up with Al Smith, the former governor of New York, and gathered a group of wealthy investors. Legend has it, Raskob pulled out a simple pencil, stood it on a table, and asked his architect, William Lamb, "How high can you make it so it won't fall down?" What followed was a construction project so fast, so audacious, it borders on mythology. The old Waldorf Astoria Hotel was demolished in record time. Then the steel skeleton began to rise. And it rose at a speed that is still, to this day, almost unbelievable. They were completing a floor a day, sometimes more. The logistics were a masterpiece of organized chaos. Trucks delivered steel beams timed to the minute, which were then hoisted up and riveted into place, often while the steel was still hot from the forge. The men who did this, the Sky Boys, many of them Mohawk ironworkers, became legends. They worked hundreds, then 1,000 feet in the air with no safety harnesses, no nets, nothing. They would casually walk across narrow beams, tossing red-hot rivets to each other. A ballet of astonishing bravery and sheer insanity. They were building a monument to the future, a testament to American industrial might. There was just one problem. While they were building it, the world fell apart. The stock market crashed in 1929. The Great Depression began to strangle the nation. But the Empire State Building was too far along to stop. The money was committed. So while the rest of the country was lining up for bread, this Tower of Hope continued to climb, a defiant gesture against the economic despair gripping the world. It was finished in a staggering 1 year and 45 days, a miracle of engineering. On May 1, 1931, President Herbert Hoover pressed a button in Washington, D.C., and for the first time, the lights of the Empire State Building turned on. It was officially open, and almost nobody came. Companies weren't expanding. They were disappearing. No one could afford the rent. The building was so vacant, New Yorkers gave it a nickname, the Empty State Building. Occupancy hovered around a disastrous 23%. The owners were losing $1 million a year. The observation deck, which cost $1 to visit, became the building's primary source of income. They tried anything to get attention. They hosted Zeppelin flybys, put a makeshift ski jump on the lower roof, and even tried to land a plane on the street outside. But its savior came not from real estate, but from Hollywood. In 1933, a movie came out about a giant ape captured and brought to New York City. The climax, of course, saw King Kong scale the tallest building in the world, swatting at biplanes from its spire. That movie did more for the building's image than any marketing campaign ever could. It transformed it from a vacant office tower into a mythic monster, a romantic, tragic part of American culture. It gave the building a soul. Yet even that iconic spire holds one of the building's greatest secrets, and one of its most outlandish lies. The official story, the one fed to the public, was that the 200-foot mast wasn't just for decoration. It was designed to be a mooring mast for dirigibles, for zeppelins. The vision was pure science fiction. A massive airship would float over Midtown Manhattan, connect to the spire, and wealthy passengers would disembark a quarter of a mile in the air, walk down an open-air gangplank, and take an elevator down to the city. It was a brilliant futuristic vision. It was also a complete fabrication, a marketing ploy. The truth was, the rival Chrysler Building had secretly constructed a spire inside its dome, hoisting it up at the last minute to steal the title of world's tallest. Raskob was furious. He needed more height and fast. The mooring mast was the perfect excuse to tack on another 200 feet and reclaim the crown. The engineers knew it was impossible. The updrafts at that altitude are ferocious, making any attempt to dock an airship a suicidal act. A few half-hearted tests were done with small blimps, one of which nearly ended in disaster when the craft was whipped around uncontrollably, dumping water ballast on terrified pedestrians below. The grand dream of transatlantic passengers arriving on 34th Street via the sky was quietly forgotten. The docking level was eventually converted into what is now the 102nd floor observatory. For decades, the Empire State Building reigned, not just as the tallest, but as the ultimate symbol of New York. It wasn't until the construction of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers in the early 1970s that it finally lost its title. But by then it didn't matter. It was too famous, too ingrained in the global consciousness. It had become more than just a building. It's the city's emotional barometer. Its world-famous tower lights, first installed in 1964, change color to celebrate holidays, sports victories, and to mourn in times of tragedy. After September 11th, it lit up in red, white, and blue, a defiant beacon in a wounded city. And it's not a museum. It's a living, breathing, and constantly evolving commercial powerhouse. In 2009, the building underwent a $550 million renovation, gutting its interior and retrofitting it to be one of the most energy-efficient buildings of its size in the country. Today, its floors are home to global brands like LinkedIn, Shutterstock, and Getty Images. It's a prime office address. The empty State Building is a distant memory. So when you look at that silhouette, don't just see a tourist attraction. See a story of pure, uncut American audacity. A building born from a high-stakes poker game between billionaires, built at impossible speed by fearless men during the darkest economic time in the nation's history. It was a colossal failure that became a cinematic legend, a marketing lie that became an iconic feature, and an aging giant that taught itself new tricks to compete in the 21st century. It set the stage, proving that a skyscraper could be more than just real estate. It could be a symbol, an advertisement for the city itself, and a character in the American story. But as grand as it was a monument to a single ego. Just a few blocks north, a different kind of vision was taking shape. One that wasn't about building a single tall tower, but an entire city within a city, a commercial and cultural complex that would change the way people live and work in the urban world forever. This new vision belonged to a man whose family name was already synonymous with unimaginable wealth and power, John D. Rockefeller Jr. But his grand project, which would become known as Rockefeller Center, was not born of hubris or a desire to scrape the sky. It was born from the ashes of a spectacular failure, a multi-million-dollar deal gone so wrong it threatened to ruin him. The story begins in the Roaring '20s, a time of seemingly endless prosperity. A consortium, including the Metropolitan Opera, wanted to build a lavish new home for itself in Midtown. Rockefeller, a philanthropist and real estate developer, agreed to lease the land, a gritty 22-acre plot filled with speakeasies and brownstones known as the Speakeasy Belt. He signed a 24-year lease, with options to renew until 2015, personally guaranteeing the $5 million a year rent. It was the most expensive lease ever signed in the city's history. Then, in October 1929, the music stopped. The stock market crashed, plunging the nation into the Great Depression. The Metropolitan Opera, along with all the other investors, pulled out. Suddenly, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was left holding the bag. A massive, eye-wateringly expensive piece of land with no partners and no plan, right as the global economy imploded. He was facing personal bankruptcy. He had two choices: walk away and accept financial ruin, or do something so audacious, so completely counterintuitive, that it might just work. He chose to double down. He decided to finance the entire project himself, transforming it from a simple opera house into the largest private building project in modern history. This wasn't going to be another solitary spire competing for height. Rockefeller envisioned a new kind of urban space. He hired a team of architects, led by the brilliant Raymond Hood, the same mind who had worked on the dramatic Chicago Tribune Tower. Hood and his team rejected the idea of a single monolithic building. Instead, they conceived of a harmonious ensemble of 19 buildings, all designed in a cohesive Art Deco style, interconnected not just by their architecture, but by a shared public purpose. Their plan was revolutionary. Instead of building right up to the property line, creating dark, cavernous street canyons like those downtown, they set the buildings back. This allowed sunlight and air to pour into the streets below, creating a more humane, more livable environment. At the very heart of the complex, they carved out a sunken plaza. This was prime real estate, space that could have been sold for a fortune. Instead, they turned it into a public square, a gift to the city. In the winter, it would become a magical ice skating rink, and in the summer, an outdoor cafe, anchored by the magnificent golden statue of Prometheus. Leading to it, they designed the Channel Gardens, a beautiful promenade with fountains and flower beds that frames a perfect view of the complex's centerpiece, the RCA building. This was the core philosophy of Rockefeller Center. Commerce and community could, and should, coexist. It was designed to be a destination, a place for people to gather, to work, to be entertained, and to simply be. As the steel skeletons began to rise, the project became a symbol of hope in a hopeless time. While the rest of the country was mired in unemployment, the construction of Rockefeller Center created jobs for over 40,000 people. It was a private project that functioned as a public works program, pumping millions of dollars into a stagnant economy. It's from this era that we get one of the most iconic photographs ever taken. Lunch atop a skyscraper. 11 ironworkers casually eating and smoking, their feet dangling 850 feet above the city streets with no safety harnesses in sight. That single image captured the death-defying courage and the quiet dignity of the men who built modern New York. They weren't just riveting steel beams. They were building a monument to human resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. But Rockefeller's vision went beyond just architecture and urban planning. He believed that art was not a luxury, but an essential part of the human experience. He commissioned over 100 works of art to be integrated directly into the building's design, centered around the theme New Frontiers and the March of Civilization. The famous bronze statue of Atlas holding the heavens stands before the International Building, a powerful symbol of endurance. But the most ambitious and ultimately most controversial piece of art was destined for the grand lobby of the main skyscraper, the RCA building, now known as 30 Rock. For this prime location, Rockefeller commissioned a massive fresco from the world's most famous muralist at the time, the Mexican artist and outspoken communist Diego Rivera. It was a bold and perhaps naive choice. Rivera's mural, titled Man at the Crossroads, was intended to depict a crossroads of modern society, contrasting the promises of technology and science with the evils of war and the oppression of the working class. As the mural took shape, however, the Rockefeller family grew increasingly nervous. Rivera was painting a searing critique of capitalism in the lobby of its newest temple. Then the final straw. Rivera added a clear and unmistakable portrait of the Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, linking arms with workers. Nelson Rockefeller, acting on his father's behalf, politely asked Rivera to replace Lenin's face with that of an unknown laborer. Rivera refused, stating, "I would rather be shot than to mutilate my mural." The response was swift. Rivera was paid his full fee, barred from the site, and the unfinished mural was draped in canvas, hidden from public view. 9 months later, under the cover of night, workmen with sledgehammers demolished it, smashing the entire fresco into rubble. The incident created an international scandal, a firestorm of debate about artistic freedom, patronage, and censorship. Rivera would later recreate the mural in Mexico City, but the blank wall in the lobby of 30 Rock remains a silent testament to one of the most dramatic clashes between art and commerce in the 20th century. Despite the controversy, Rockefeller Center opened to great success. It was a masterpiece of integration. The 70-story RCA building was its commercial heart, home to the new National Broadcasting Company and its radio studios. Flanking the plaza was Radio City Music Hall, the largest indoor theater in the world, an Art Deco palace designed to provide high-class entertainment for the masses. But the real genius lay beneath the surface. An entire underground concourse was built, a subterranean city of shops and restaurants that connected every building in the complex. You could arrive at Grand Central, walk underground to Rockefeller Center, go to work, go out for lunch, see a movie, and go shopping, all without ever putting on a coat in the winter. It was a triumph of design and a model of efficiency. It proved that a large-scale development could be both profitable and a beloved public space. It set the standard for urban planning for decades to come, influencing projects from London's Canary Wharf to Tokyo's Roppongi Hills. Rockefeller Center was more than just a collection of buildings. It was a bold declaration of faith in the future of the American city, built when that future looked its bleakest. It was the final glorious crescendo of the Art Deco skyscraper era. But as the world recovered from the Depression and hurtled towards a second global conflict, the architectural zeitgeist was about to change dramatically. The age of ornate, decorative towers was coming to an end. A new philosophy was rising, one that stripped away the past and embraced a future of pure, unadorned glass and steel. And so, from the ashes of global conflict, a new corporate America emerged, one that had no time for the gargoyles and spires of the past. It was a culture of efficiency, of data, of the bottom line. It needed an architecture to match. This new philosophy, which came to be known as the International Style, had been brewing in Europe for decades, championed by visionaries like Walter Gropius, Le Corbusier, and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. They saw beauty not in applied ornament, but in pure form, in the honest expression of structure and material. With many of these architects fleeing a war-torn Europe for the United States, New York City became the ultimate canvas for their revolutionary ideas. The result would be a wave of sleek, rational glass and steel boxes that would forever redefine the skyscraper and the city itself. The first shot in this revolution was fired not with a bang, but with the quiet, shimmering hum of glass. In 1952, on Park Avenue, a building appeared that looked like it had landed from another planet. This was Lever House, the headquarters for the British soap company Lever Brothers. And it was, in every sense, a building about being clean. The company wanted a headquarters that embodied its product: modern, hygienic, and transparent. What they got was a game-changer. Designed by Gordon Bunshaft of the now legendary firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Lever House broke every established rule for a New York skyscraper. Instead of a heavy stone tower rising directly from the sidewalk, Bunshaft created a delicate, 24-story slab of blue-green glass that seemed to float weightlessly above a 2-story horizontal base. And most shockingly of all, instead of maximizing every square inch of expensive Manhattan real estate, the building occupied only a quarter of its lot. The rest was given back to the public in the form of an open plaza and courtyard, a landscape garden for the people of the city. This was unheard of. It was a civic gesture so radical and so popular that it would directly lead to New York's landmark 1961 zoning resolution, which offered developers incentives, like extra floor space, if they included public plazas in their designs. Nearly every skyscraper plaza you see in the city today owes its existence to the precedent set by Lever House. The building was also one of the very first in New York to use a glass curtain wall. This means the exterior walls of glass and steel aren't actually supporting the building's weight. They're just a skin, a weather screen hung onto the building's hidden steel skeleton. This allowed for an unprecedented feeling of lightness and openness. But it also created a massive problem. A sealed glass box in the New York sun is essentially a giant greenhouse. The building's air conditioning costs were astronomical. And because the windows couldn't be opened, how do you clean them? Bunshaft and his team had to invent a solution. A custom-designed roof-mounted gondola, a small steel carriage that could move along a track, lowering window washers down the face of the building. This machine, a marvel of bespoke engineering, became as iconic as the building itself. Lever House was more than a building. It was a total design statement, a pristine machine for working. But as revolutionary as it was about to be perfected just a few blocks away. If Lever House was the opening act, the Seagram building was the undisputed headliner. Completed in 1958, it stands directly across Park Avenue, a dark, stately, and impossibly elegant bronze monarch. This building is the story of an epic quest for perfection. The client was Samuel Bronfman, the head of the Seagram liquor empire. He didn't just want an office building. He wanted a monument, a timeless masterpiece that would shout to the world that his brand was the epitome of quality and taste. His daughter, Phyllis Lambert, an architecture student herself, was tasked with finding the architect. She famously wrote to her father, "This is not a job for any Tom, Dick, or Harry. You must get a master." She convinced him to hire the master of modernism, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, for whom this would be his first and only New York skyscraper. Mies took the ideas pioneered at Lever House and elevated them to the level of high art. He embraced the concept of the public plaza but made it even grander, setting his tower back 100 feet from the bustling avenue, creating a vast granite plaza with twin fountains. This wasn't just a small courtyard. It was a grand public square, an outdoor lobby that presented the building like a sculpture on a pedestal. It was an extravagant use of some of the most expensive real estate on Earth, a gesture of supreme corporate confidence. And then there was the building itself. Mies's famous motto was "less is more," but his version of less was anything but cheap. The Seagram building is one of the most expensive skyscrapers ever built for its time, precisely because of its fanatical devotion to material and detail. While other glass boxes use standard aluminum or steel, Mies insisted on architectural bronze for the exterior frame. This gave the tower its unique, dark, whiskey-colored glow that ages beautifully, developing a rich patina over time. He even added purely decorative bronze I-beams to the exterior. Why? To articulate the structure hidden behind the glass, to give the building visual rhythm and vertical force. It was a masterstroke of design, using non-functional elements to express the building's underlying truth. The obsession with detail continued inside. The lobby features Roman travertine marble, perfectly book-matched so the grain flows continuously across the walls. Every light fixture, every elevator panel, every doorknob was custom designed by Mies and his team. He even dictated the window treatments. To ensure the building's exterior always looked uniform and pristine, the window blinds were designed to be set in only one of three positions: fully open, halfway, or fully closed. Tenants were contractually obligated to follow the rule. This wasn't just an office building. It was a total work of art, a Gesamtkunstwerk, where every single element was controlled by the architect's singular vision. This vision extended to the building's most famous tenant, the Four Seasons restaurant. Designed by Mies's collaborator Philip Johnson, it was for over 50 years the epicenter of the New York Power Lunch. With its 20-foot ceilings, French walnut walls, and a bubbling white marble pool at its center, it was the definition of modernist luxury. The entire space was a landmark, a perfect fusion of architecture, art, and cuisine that embodied the sophisticated spirit of the Seagram building itself. Together, Lever House and the Seagram building defined the look of corporate America for the next half-century. They were elegant, rational, and breathtakingly new. They created a template, the glass box set back on a plaza, that was copied and often poorly imitated in every major city across the globe. But this new age of architectural purity came at a cost. Critics began to argue that these glass towers were cold, anonymous, and alienating. The plazas, intended as public amenities, were often windswept, empty spaces that broke the vibrant energy of the city's street life. The less is more philosophy, when executed without Mies van der Rohe's budget or obsessive genius, often just resulted in less. The sleek glass box, once a symbol of a bold new future, was on its way to becoming a cliché, a symbol of faceless corporate conformity. The stage was set for another rebellion, a new generation of architects who would look at the rigid purity of the glass box and decide it was time to break it. And break it they did. But the first, most audacious blow came from the most unexpected direction imaginable. It came not from a young upstart, but from the very high priest of American modernism himself, Philip Johnson. This was the man who, alongside Henry Russell Hitchcock, had literally written the book on the international style. He had championed Mies van der Rohe, celebrated the glass box, and lived in a house made almost entirely of glass. For him to turn against the movement he helped create was like the Pope declaring he was an atheist. It was a betrayal of the highest order, and it was glorious. By the late 1970s, the corporate world was booming, and the biggest communications company on the planet, AT&T, needed a new headquarters. They wanted a monument, a building that spoke not of lightweight, transparent modernity, but of permanence, power, and history. And they gave the commission to Philip Johnson. The world of architecture held its breath, expecting another sleek, elegant, perfectly proportioned glass tower. What they got instead was a stick of dynamite wrapped in pink granite. When the designs for the new AT&T building at 550 Madison Avenue were unveiled in 1978, the reaction was not just criticism. It was pure, unadulterated shock. The building was a massive, solid shaft of stone, rising 647 feet without the slightest hint of a setback. It rejected the lightness of glass and steel in favor of the heavy, earthbound authority of granite. The windows were punched into the facade, small and recessed, making the walls feel thick and impenetrable, like a medieval fortress. At the base, a colossal 116-foot-tall archway, impossibly grand and reminiscent of a Roman aqueduct, served as the entrance. It was a building that looked backward, not forward. But it was the top that caused the real scandal. The very top. Instead of a flat roof, the logical, functional conclusion to a modern skyscraper, Johnson crowned his creation with a massive 30-foot-tall broken pediment. To the average person, it looked like the top of a grandfather clock or a Chippendale highboy cabinet. And that's exactly what it was meant to evoke. It was a joke. A wink. A giant stone-clad piece of historical furniture dropped onto the Manhattan skyline. The architectural establishment lost its mind. One prominent critic called it a betrayal, a playboy's joke. They saw it as a capitulation to kitsch, an abandonment of the serious, high-minded principles of modernism. But they were missing the point. Johnson wasn't just designing a building. He was writing a manifesto. He was declaring, in the most public and permanent way possible, that modernism's rigid rules were dead. Ornament was no longer a crime. History was no longer forbidden. Architecture could be playful, referential, and even a little bit funny. The AT&T building wasn't a skyscraper. It was a declaration of war against the glass box, and its pink granite facade was the first shot fired. To walk into the lobby of 550 Madison was to experience this rebellion firsthand. Forget the airy, open, transparent lobbies of the Seagram or Lever House. The AT&T lobby was a cavern. It was dark, majestic, and intentionally overwhelming. The ceilings were vaulted, the floors were patterned in intricate marble, and the walls were clad in the same heavy stone as the exterior. It felt less like an office building and more like the nave of a cathedral dedicated to the power of global communication. Everything was designed to convey a sense of gravitas and permanence. Even the elevators were hidden away, so as not to disrupt the monumental feel of the space. In the center of the lobby stood a colossal statue, a 24-foot-tall gilded figure titled Golden Boy, which had once stood atop AT&T's old headquarters downtown. By bringing this piece of the company's own history into the heart of their new building, Johnson was making another radical statement: that a corporation's story, its past, was just as important as its future. This was the polar opposite of the forward-looking, history-erasing ethos of the international style. This was a building that celebrated its own mythology. The building officially opened in 1984, and it fundamentally changed the conversation. It gave other architects permission to break the rules. Suddenly, skylines across America started sprouting towers with strange, historically inspired tops. Pyramids, gables, and arches began to appear where flat roofs once dominated. This new movement, dubbed postmodernism, was a direct result of the bomb Johnson had thrown into the heart of Manhattan. He had single-handedly made history fashionable again. But the story of 550 Madison is also a story of corporate fortunes. AT&T, the monolithic giant for whom this granite fortress was built, was broken up by the government in the very same year the building opened. The company that commissioned a monument to its eternal dominance began to dissolve almost the moment they moved in. The building has since changed hands multiple times, first sold to Sony, who filled its grand archway with glass to create a retail storefront, a move that many saw as a desecration of the original design. More recently, a controversial plan to replace the stone base with a wavy glass curtain wall sparked a massive outcry from the preservationist community. The building that was once reviled as a monstrous joke had, over the course of a few decades, become a beloved, irreplaceable icon. It was a landmark of a specific moment in time, a testament to a rebellion that redefined the city's architecture. The protests were successful, and in 2018, 550 Madison Avenue, the Chippendale skyscraper, became the youngest building in New York City to be designated a landmark, cementing its place in the architectural pantheon. The legacy of postmodernism is complex. It opened the door for more expressive and varied forms of architecture, but it also led to some truly questionable designs, buildings that now look more dated than the timeless modern structures they were rebelling against. The movement's focus on surface-level style and historical quotation often felt shallow, a costume party for buildings. The very rebellion, once fresh and exciting, quickly became its own kind of formula. Architects were now expected to add a quirky historical flourish, whether it made sense or not. And while architects were busy arguing about style, about whether a building should look like a Greek temple or a piece of furniture, a much more powerful force was quietly reshaping the city. It wasn't an artistic movement. It was the sheer, unstoppable power of global capital. A new kind of client was emerging. Not a corporation looking to build a monument to itself, but a developer looking to sell apartments in the sky to the world's wealthiest people. They didn't care about style or history. They cared about views, square footage, and return on investment. This new demand would require a new kind of engineering, a new kind of architecture, and it would give birth to a new kind of skyscraper, the super slender, impossibly tall residential tower. The Skyline was about to get a lot more crowded and a lot more expensive. And so it did. Suddenly, the sky above Central Park South began to sprout a new kind of architecture. Not the broad-shouldered office towers of the 20th century, but something alien. Impossibly thin, impossibly tall, these towers didn't look like they were built. They looked like they were drawn, sketched onto the sky with a ruler and a fine-point pen. This was the birth of Billionaire's Row. A name that sounds like a monopoly space but represents a very real and very radical transformation of New York City. It wasn't just one building. It was a phenomenon, a perfect storm of global capital, clever zoning, and audacious engineering. The story of these towers isn't just about architecture. It's about the very nature of wealth in the 21st century. After the 2008 financial crisis, the world's ultra-rich were looking for a safe place to park their money. Not a bank, but something tangible. Something solid. And what's more solid than a piece of the Manhattan skyline? New York's arcane zoning laws held the key. Developers discovered they could buy up the air rights from neighboring shorter buildings. Think of it like this. Every plot of land in New York has a theoretical maximum height you can build on it. If a historic low-rise church next door has only used a fraction of its allowable height, a developer can write them a massive check to buy their unused sky. They could then stack that purchased airspace on top of their own lot, allowing them to build far higher than would normally be permitted. They were literally buying the sky. The first true shot across the bow was 157, rising just over 1,000 feet. Its curving, pixelated blue glass facade was meant to evoke a cascading waterfall. It was an instant icon and an instant controversy. When it was completed in 2014, it shattered records. A penthouse sold for over $100 million. The first time that nine-figure barrier had ever been broken in the city. It proved a market existed for apartments that cost more than the GDP of a small island nation. It also became a symbol of the city's anxieties. During Hurricane Sandy in 2012, its partially constructed crane collapsed, dangling precariously over 57th Street for days. A terrifying, tangible metaphor for the high-risk, high-reward game being played on the skyline. But if 157 was the opening act, the headliner was just a block away. A building so stark, so simple, and so unbelievably tall that it seems to defy logic. 432 Park Avenue. From a distance, it looks like a rendering, a glitch in the Matrix. It's not beautiful in a traditional sense. There's no soaring spire, no elegant tapering, no decorative flourishes. It is simply a grid. A perfect, relentless concrete and glass grid. 1,396 feet tall. It's less a piece of architecture and more a piece of mathematics shot into the clouds. Its architect, Raphael Viñoly, famously said the design was inspired by a trash can. Not just any trash can, but an elegant, square, lattice wastebasket designed in 1905 by Viennese modernist Joseph Hoffmann. He saw in its pure geometry a kind of perfect, repeatable logic. And that's what 432 Park is. A stack of perfect squares, each one punctuated by 10-foot by 10-foot windows. The effect is mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. It's a building that cares nothing for your opinion of it. Simply is. But how do you build something that tall and that skinny? 432 Park has a height-to-width ratio of 15:1. For perspective, that's like standing a standard pencil on its end. The slightest breeze should send it toppling over. The engineering challenge was immense. The solution was twofold. First, a massive reinforced concrete core runs up the center of the building, containing the elevators and mechanicals, acting as a super strong spine. The entire outer grid structure is then attached to this spine. But that alone isn't enough to stop the sway. For any skyscraper, wind is the enemy. For a super slender, it's a potential nightmare. Viñoly's design had an ingenious, if visually jarring solution. Every 12 floors, an entire level is left completely open to the elements. These mechanical floors have no windows. They are double-height, hollowed-out sections that allow the wind to simply pass through the building, rather than push against it. This relieves the immense pressure on the structure and dramatically reduces the sway that residents would feel on the upper floors. It's the architectural equivalent of letting out a deep breath. Inside, the apartments are just as minimalist as the exterior. Vast, open spaces with those gigantic square windows serving as the only artwork you'd ever need. The views are, without exaggeration, godlike. You don't just see Central Park. You see its entire rectangular perfection, like a green welcome mat unfurled at your feet. You see the curvature of the earth. You watch planes landing at LaGuardia and JFK from above. You can track storm systems as they roll in from the Atlantic. It's a perspective on New York that had never existed before, a view reserved for helicopter pilots and angels. And the price for this view? Astronomical. Apartments regularly sell for tens of millions of dollars. The Penthouse, a 6-bedroom palace in the sky, first listed for $95 million. This isn't just real estate. It's a new class of asset, a safety deposit box with a billion-dollar view. But the story of 432 Park Avenue took a dramatic turn after the first residents moved in. Reports began to leak out. Stories of nightmarish problems that engineering couldn't fully predict. The building swayed as all tall buildings do, but residents described a terrifying symphony of creaks, groans, and bangs. The sound of partition walls straining against the concrete frame. Elevator cables would slap against each other in the shafts, causing shutdowns that trapped people for hours. Worse, there were reports of catastrophic water damage. High-pressure plumbing would burst, sending water cascading down multiple floors, causing millions in damages. The very height that made it so valuable also made it incredibly vulnerable. An engineer quoted in the New York Times described the core issue perfectly. You're taking a system designed for a 40-story building and trying to make it work in an 80-story building. You're pushing the known limits of physics. For 32, Park Avenue became a monument to both human ingenuity and human hubris. It's a masterpiece of engineering that solved the problem of how to build so high, but perhaps created a new set of problems about how to live there. It and the other towers of Billionaires Row fundamentally altered the city. They cast long shadows literally, stretching across Central Park in the afternoons, plunging playgrounds and lawns into darkness. They created a debate about a city of haves and have-nots, where foreign billionaires could buy apartments as investments, leave them empty for most of the year, while the city below grappled with a housing crisis. These super-slender towers represent the ultimate luxury product, the residential equivalent of a hypercar or a superyacht. They are vertical gated communities divorced from the street life that makes New York, New York. They are magnificent, controversial, and a powerful statement about where global wealth was flowing in the early 21st century. They were homes for the 1% of the 1%. But this new Gilded Age wasn't just reshaping where the wealthy lived. It was also about to completely reinvent the places where they worked. The monolithic single-corporation headquarters of the Mad Men era was dying. A new kind of commercial building was needed for a new kind of economy, one built on technology, finance, and a relentless war for talent. The next great transformation wasn't just about going higher. It was about getting smarter. And so, the race for the sky was replaced by a race for the soul. Before the tech giants and hedge funds redefined the skyline, one building, completed in 1958, served as an architectural prophet. 375 Park Avenue, the Seagram Building. Designed by the master of modernism, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, it was a radical departure from the wedding cake towers of the past. It wasn't the tallest, but it was arguably the most perfect. Van der Rohe's philosophy was less is more, and the Seagram Building was its sermon in bronze and glass. He did something unheard of. On some of the most expensive real estate on Earth, he set the tower back from the street, creating a vast open granite plaza. His corporate clients were horrified. They were paying for every square inch of Park Avenue, and their architect was giving it away to the public for free. But Van der Rohe understood something profound. Luxury isn't just about what you own, it's about the space you command. That plaza became a gift to the city, a place for people to meet, to rest, to simply exist. It transformed the building from a private fortress into a public landmark. Inside, the obsessive attention to detail was legendary. The custom bronze I-beams on the facade weren't structural. They were there to express the structure hidden behind, to give the building visual rhythm and logic. The window blinds were designed with only 3 positions: fully up, halfway down, or fully down, to maintain a uniform, pristine appearance from the outside. The Seagram was more than an office. It was a statement. It whispered power instead of shouting it. It argued that the quality of a space, the light, the materials, the very feeling it invoked, was the ultimate corporate asset. It was a ghost in the machine. a hint of a future where the employee experience would become as important as the company letterhead. But for every elegant prophecy, there is a brutal reaction. Just 5 years later, and a few blocks south, a monster rose to block the sun. The Pan Am building, now the MetLife building. If the Seagram was a finely tailored suit, the Pan Am was a concrete sledgehammer. It was a pure expression of corporate might, an octagonal behemoth of 59 stories, plopped directly on top of Grand Central Terminal, completely severing the majestic view corridor down Park Avenue. The public outcry was deafening. It was seen as an act of architectural vandalism, a monument to corporate arrogance. It had no public plaza, no subtle details. It was all about cramming as much office space as physically possible into one of the city's most sensitive locations. It even had a helicopter pad on the roof, a symbol of executive power so extreme it seemed like something out of a James Bond movie. The Pan Am building represented the absolute peak, and the spectacular dead end, of the mid-century corporate mindset. It was the last gasp of an era that believed bigger was always better, and that the city was merely a chessboard for titans to place their pieces. The world changed. The dawn of the 21st century brought with it the dot-com bust and the unspeakable trauma of 9/11. The economy shifted under New York's feet. Finance became more complex, technology became the engine of everything, and media was fragmenting into 1,000 digital pieces. In this new landscape, the most valuable commodity wasn't floor space. It was brainpower. The war for talent became ferocious. A brilliant coder, a visionary analyst, a creative genius. These were the assets that could make or break a company. And these people didn't want to work in the fluorescent-lit, soul-crushing cubicle farms of the Pan Am building. They wanted inspiration. They wanted light. They wanted a workplace that reflected their values, sustainability, collaboration, and a connection to the world around them. The office was no longer just a place to work. It had to become a destination, a tool for recruitment and retention. Out of this demand, a new icon was born, a building that would literally build a new future on top of an old past. The Hearst Tower. The original 6-story Hearst magazine building, a cast stone landmark from 1928, was always intended to be the base for a grand skyscraper. But the Great Depression halted those plans, leaving the Art Deco base as an unfulfilled promise for over 70 years. When the Hearst Corporation decided to finally build their tower in the early 2000s, they didn't tear down the old building. They did something far more daring. They chose architect Norman Foster to perform a kind of architectural heart transplant. The entire interior of the landmarked base was carefully scooped out, preserving the historic facade like a delicate shell. Then, rising from within that shell, Foster erected a 46-story tower of shimmering glass and steel. The tower itself was a revolution. Instead of a traditional grid of vertical columns and horizontal beams, Foster used a diagrid, a triangulated frame that is both incredibly strong and incredibly light. This design used 20% less steel than a conventional skyscraper, a massive environmental and financial saving. But its true genius was on the inside. The diagrid structure meant the interior spaces were almost entirely column-free. It created vast, open floors flooded with natural light, designed not for isolation but for interaction. The corners of the building, typically reserved for the top executives, became soaring 4-story high atriums, urban windows that connected different floors and departments, encouraging the very kind of spontaneous collaboration that drives innovation. The new philosophy was embedded in every detail. The soaring 3-story atrium, which they call the town square, is not just a lobby, it's the building's social heart. In its center is a massive water feature called Icefall, a sculpture that uses collected rainwater to humidify and cool the atrium, saving enormous amounts of energy. The floors are paved with heat-conducting limestone. The steel is 90% recycled. The entire building was designed from the ground up to breathe, to conserve, to be a responsible citizen of the planet. It became the first skyscraper in New York to receive a gold LEED rating for environmental design. The Hearst Tower was more than a building. It was a manifesto. It declared that a company's headquarters could be both a tribute to its history and a bold leap into its future. It proved that sustainable design wasn't a compromise. It was a competitive advantage. It was a glass cathedral built for a new kind of work, a place designed to attract and inspire the brightest minds on the planet. This wasn't just smart, it was a paradigm shift. And it wasn't an isolated event. Just a few years later, across town at the corner of Bryant Park, the Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park would take this green philosophy even further. It pushed the boundaries of sustainable technology, becoming the first skyscraper in the world to achieve LEED Platinum certification, the highest possible honor. It featured its own on-site power generation plant, a system to capture and reuse rainwater and wastewater, and a state-of-the-art air filtration system that made the air inside the building cleaner than the air outside. The message was clear. The future of commercial architecture in New York was no longer about brute force or opulent lobbies. It was about intelligence. It was about health. It was about creating environments that didn't just house people, but help them thrive. The definition of a trophy building had been permanently rewritten. The question had shifted from, how high can we build? To, how well can we build? This new, more thoughtful, more human-centric approach to building would soon face its ultimate test. At the most challenging and sacred ground in modern American history, the void left in the lower Manhattan skyline was more than just a physical absence. It was a wound, a 16-acre chasm of dust and memory that posed the most profound architectural and existential question of the 21st century. What do you build on sacred ground? How do you honor the dead while embracing the future? How do you project strength without erasing vulnerability? For a city that had always built with defiant ambition, this was a moment of deep and painful introspection. The world was watching and everyone had an opinion. Some argued the entire site should be a park, a permanent memorial untouched by commerce. Others insisted that to not rebuild, to not raise new towers even taller than before, would be to let the terrorists win. The debate raged for months, turning into years. It wasn't just about steel and glass. It was about the soul of New York and the very identity of America. The Lower Manhattan Development Corporation was formed, and an international competition was launched to create a master plan. The winning design, announced in 2003, came from an architect named Daniel Libeskind. His vision, titled Memory Foundations, wasn't just a blueprint, it was a piece of poetry. Libeskind proposed leaving the massive foundation footprints of the original Twin Towers as sunken memorial pools, a permanent reminder of the absence. He insisted on exposing the slurry wall, the concrete retaining wall that held back the Hudson River and miraculously survived the collapse, as a testament to endurance and the strength of the city's foundations. His plan was rich with symbolism. He laid out a spiral of new towers, culminating in a soaring asymmetrical skyscraper he called the Freedom Tower. Its proposed height was not arbitrary. It would rise to a symbolic 1,776 feet, a direct reference to the year of American independence. And he designed the entire site so that every year on September 11th, at the exact time the attacks occurred, a wedge of light would shine, unshadowed by any of the new buildings, across the Memorial Plaza. It was a plan that prioritized memory over mammon, meaning over sheer square footage. And it was immediately embraced by the public. But a master plan is a guide, not a final design. And the man who held the lease to the site, developer Larry Silverstein, had a different priority: to rebuild the 10 million square feet of office space he was contractually obligated to. His architect was David Childs of the powerhouse firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, the same firm behind the Willis Tower and the Burj Khalifa. Childs was a master of the super-tall skyscraper, a pragmatist known for elegant, efficient, and most importantly buildable designs. What followed was one of the most public and contentious architectural battles in history. It was the artist versus the pragmatist, the poet versus the builder. Libeskind fought to preserve the symbolic asymmetrical form of his Freedom Tower. Childs argued for a more traditional, symmetrical, and structurally sound design that would be safer and more appealing to commercial tenants. The New York Police Department weighed in, demanding a building that could withstand a powerful truck bomb, which meant a massive, windowless 20-story concrete base. For a time, it seemed the project would collapse under the weight of competing interests. The result, after years of redesigns and public feuds, was a compromise. The building, now officially named One World Trade Center, kept Libeskind's symbolic 1,776-foot height and its location on the master plan. But its form became the one we see today, a sleek, tapering obelisk designed by Childs. It starts with a square base, the same 200-foot by 200-foot dimension as the original Twin Towers. As it rises, its corners are chamfered back, creating 8 tall isosceles triangles. At its midpoint, the tower forms a perfect octagon, before culminating in a square at the top, rotated 45 degrees from the base. It's a design of immense geometric purity, one that appears to shift and shimmer depending on the light and the angle from which you view it. And that fortress-like base the NYPD demanded? It was cleverly disguised. Instead of bare concrete, it was clad in thousands of shimmering prismatic glass fins, creating a dynamic, almost welcoming facade that belies the sheer strength underneath. But the true genius of One World Trade Center isn't just what you see. It's the story of survival built into its very bones. This is arguably the safest skyscraper ever constructed. Its core is a fortress of high-strength concrete, 3 feet thick, encasing all stairwells, elevators, and communication systems. The stairwells themselves are extra wide and pressurized to keep smoke out. There are dedicated stairwells for first responders. The building's steel frame is coated with an ultra-resilient, spray-on fireproofing, far more robust than what was used in the original towers. Its air filtration system includes chemical and biological filters. Every single design choice was a direct response to the failures and lessons of 9/11. It was the physical manifestation of the promise to never forget. Yet, the rebuilding of the World Trade Center was never just about one tower. It was about creating a neighborhood. For World Trade Center, designed by Fumihiko Maki, is a study in minimalist elegance, a quiet and respectful neighbor to the memorial. 3 World Trade Center by Richard Rogers is an industrial masterpiece, its exposed steel bracing giving it a powerful, muscular presence. And the entire site is anchored by a building that is as much a sculpture as it is a train station. Santiago Calatrava's World Trade Center transportation hub, better known as the Oculus. The Oculus is a building of pure, unadulterated optimism. It's a shock of white against the gray of the city. Calatrava designed it to resemble a bird being released from a child's hands. Inside, a vast column-free hall is flooded with natural light from the massive central skylight. The space is cathedral-like, a stark contrast to the dark, cramped train stations of old. And it holds its own secret tribute. The main skylight was designed to be retractable, opening to the sky for just a few minutes each year on September 11th, a symbolic gesture of hope and remembrance. It was fantastically expensive and plagued by delays, but it gave the site something it desperately needed: a sense of grace, of rebirth. Today, the World Trade Center is a complex, layered place. It's a place of profound grief, where visitors trace the names etched in bronze around the memorial pools. It's a bustling commercial hub, with thousands of people working in the new towers. It's a major retail destination and a vital transit nexus. It is a testament to the messy, painful, and ultimately awe-inspiring process of turning an unimaginable tragedy into a symbol of resilience. It proved that the question was no longer just about building high or even building well. It was about building with purpose, with memory, and with a profound sense of responsibility to the past and the future. This monumental effort to rebuild a wounded piece of the city would soon be mirrored by an equally audacious project. Not to rebuild, but to build an entire new city within a city, on a scale New York hadn't seen in nearly a century. For decades, it was Manhattan's final frontier. A vast 28-acre expanse on the far west side. A windswept trench of steel and gravel that most New Yorkers only saw from the window of a train. This was the West Side Yard, an active, open-air storage and maintenance depot for the Long Island Railroad. It was a massive gaping hole in the city's fabric, a place where Manhattan simply stopped. To developers, it was the largest piece of undeveloped real estate on the island, a tantalizing prize locked behind an impossible problem. You couldn't just build next to the rail yards. The only way to build was over them. And these weren't abandoned tracks. They were a vital, pulsing artery of the region's transit system, with hundreds of trains moving in and out every single day. Shutting them down was not an option. Building a new neighborhood out of thin air, on a platform suspended over one of the busiest rail yards in North America, while the trains continued to run below. It was a fantasy, a project so complex, so expensive, so audacious, it was considered by many to be pure science fiction. But in New York, the line between science fiction and a construction project is often just a matter of funding and engineering will. The dream of Hudson Yards was to solve this century-old problem. The plan was breathtaking in its scope, to construct 2 massive platforms over the eastern and western portions of the yard, effectively creating 28 acres of brand new land. This wasn't like filling in a swamp, it was like building a bridge the size of a neighborhood. The engineering challenge was monumental. First, they had to sink hundreds of caissons, colossal concrete and steel pillars, deep into the bedrock between the active train tracks. This was a surgical operation on an industrial scale, with crews working in the narrow windows of time when train traffic was at its lowest. These caissons would serve as the legs of a giant table. On top of these legs, they would lay a grid of gargantuan steel trusses, some weighing as much as a commercial airplane. And then there was the heat. An active rail yard generates an enormous amount of thermal energy from the train engines. If you simply put a lid on it, you'd essentially cook the underside of your new city. So engineers devised a brilliant solution. A 7-foot deep plenum space between the train yard and the platform, equipped with a network of 15 massive fans, the kind you'd normally find in a jet engine testing facility. This system circulates air and liquid coolant through a 5-mile-long network of tubes, capturing the heat from the trains and dissipating it, ensuring the ground beneath the new parks and plazas doesn't melt. It's a city with its own circulatory and respiratory system, a living machine built on top of another living machine. With the foundation, the most expensive and complex part of the puzzle, in place, the towers could begin to rise. The first to break the skyline was 10 Hudson Yards, opening in 2016. Its design is striking, a crystalline tower that leans back, almost as if in deference to the High Line Park that snakes its way directly into the building's base. It was the pioneer, the proof of concept that this impossible neighborhood could actually become a reality. It quickly filled with marquee tenants like Coach, L'Oreal and SAP, sending a clear signal to the corporate world. The West Side was no longer the edge of the map. It was the new center. But the true king of this new kingdom is 30 Hudson Yards. Soaring to over 1,296 feet, it's the third tallest office building in New York City, a sleek angular behemoth that now defines the western skyline. Home to corporate giants like Wells Fargo and Warner Brothers Discovery, its sheer scale is a testament to the project's ambition. But its most famous feature isn't inside its offices. It's what juts out from its 100th floor. This is the Edge. And it is not for the faint of heart. It's the highest outdoor sky deck in the entire Western Hemisphere, a 7,500 square foot triangular platform that cantilevers 80 feet out from the side of the building. To step onto it is to step into the sky itself. The floor is made of thick laminated glass, giving you the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of floating more than 1,100 feet above the city streets. You're not just looking at the skyline, you are in the skyline. It was a direct, audacious challenge to the city's other great observation decks at the Empire State Building and One World Trade, a statement piece designed to be an icon from the moment it opened. Flanking these giants are towers like 55 Hudson Yards, a muscular, grid-like structure with a facade that pays homage to the cast-iron buildings of Soho, and 50 Hudson Yards, a massive 3-part tower that became one of the most expensive office buildings ever constructed in the city, now serving as the headquarters for the investment firm BlackRock and a major hub for Meta. Together, these buildings formed a new corporate nexus, pulling thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in economic activity to a part of town that was once nothing more than a place to park trains. Yet, for all its engineering marvels and corporate success, Hudson Yards has been a lightning rod for criticism. From its inception, it was decried by some as a sterile, soulless enclave for the ultra-rich, a billionaire's playground built with significant public subsidies. Critics pointed to the luxury condos, the high-end mall filled with designer brands, and the lack of integration with the surrounding, more established neighborhoods like Hell's Kitchen. It felt, to many, like a private city that had been airdropped into the middle of a public one. Nowhere were these tensions more visible than at the development's centerpiece, the Vessel. A 16-story honeycomb-like sculpture of interconnected staircases, it was meant to be New York's version of the Eiffel Tower, an interactive landmark for the public to climb and experience. Designed by Thomas Heatherwick, the copper-clad structure was an immediate visual sensation. But its promise was soon overshadowed by tragedy. After a series of devastating suicides, the structure was closed indefinitely to the public, its future uncertain. The Vessel became a somber symbol of the project's complicated legacy, a spectacular, ambitious creation that struggled to connect with the very soul of the city it was meant to redefine. Hudson Yards is an undeniable feat. It is a testament to 21st century engineering, a high-stakes real estate gamble that paid off, and a project that fundamentally recentered Manhattan's economic gravity. It proved that New York City could still dream and build on a scale that defies belief. It conquered the island's last physical frontier. But as this gleaming new city of glass and steel was rising on the west side, a different kind of revolution was quietly taking place downtown. It wasn't about building over rail yards, but about breathing new life into forgotten factories and warehouses. The old industrial heart of the city was being rewired for a new digital age, creating a different kind of corporate campus, one that would challenge the very idea of what a modern office building should be. And nowhere was this challenge more apparent or more monumental than in a building that many New Yorkers walk past without a second glance. It's not a soaring spire that pierces the clouds. It doesn't glisten with Art Deco ornamentation or postmodern flair. In fact, it's the opposite of a skyscraper. It's a landscraper, a monolithic brick fortress that consumes an entire city block in Chelsea, so vast that it has its own zip code. This is 111 8th Avenue, and its story is the story of New York's transition from an industrial titan to a digital powerhouse. To understand its importance, you have to forget everything you know about verticality. This building is a testament to the power of horizontality. Completed in 1932, it was originally known as the Port Authority Commerce Building. It wasn't designed for executives in suits. It was designed for trucks, trains, and tons of freight. It was a machine for commerce, a vertical sorting facility where goods could be moved with unprecedented efficiency. Massive elevators, originally built to lift fully loaded tractor trailers between floors, were a key feature. Raw materials could arrive by train on the ground floor, be lifted to a factory on an upper floor for manufacturing, and the finished products could then be lowered to a different level for distribution, all without ever touching a city street. It was a self-contained industrial ecosystem, a concrete behemoth built for a bygone era of American manufacturing. For decades, it served its purpose. But as the city's industrial base eroded, the giant's purpose began to fade. The vast, empty floors, built to withstand the weight of heavy machinery and rumbling trucks, fell quiet. It became a relic too big to tear down, too specialized to easily repurpose. Or so it seemed, because the very features that made it an industrial powerhouse in the 1930s, its incredibly strong construction, its massive, open floor plates, and its access to immense power and connectivity infrastructure, made it the perfect host for the next revolution, the digital one. In the 1990s, before the dot-com boom reached its fever pitch, tech pioneers recognized the building's hidden potential. Its thick concrete walls and robust power grid were ideal for housing something new and absolutely critical: servers. The building began its transformation into one of the most important telecommunications hubs on the planet. It became what's known as a carrier hotel, a place where different internet and data networks physically connect. Its old industrial arteries were ripped out and replaced with fiber optic cable, miles and miles of it, turning 111 8th Avenue into a major choke point for the internet traffic of the entire East Coast. It was the digital equivalent of its old life as a freight terminal, only now it was moving packets of data instead of pallets of goods. And then, in 2010, the game changed forever. A young, disruptive tech company from California, which had been leasing space in the building, made a move that sent shockwaves through the New York real estate world. Google bought the entire building. The price tag was a staggering $1.9 billion, one of the largest single-building real estate transactions in the city's history. It was a declaration. The tech industry wasn't just visiting New York, it was moving in and it was buying the block. Google didn't just want office space. They wanted the infrastructure. By purchasing 111 8th Avenue, they weren't just acquiring a new headquarters. They were taking ownership of one of the most connected buildings in the world, giving them a massive strategic advantage. But what they did inside the building is what truly redefined the concept of a corporate campus in New York. They took those colossal, uninterrupted floor plates, each one spanning acres, and turned them into a sprawling horizontal world for their employees. Forget the corner office with a view. Here, the currency was collaboration and creativity. The sheer scale of the floors allowed for the creation of entire neighborhoods within the office. Scooters and bikes became a common way to travel from one department to another. The interior was a whimsical landscape of themed micro-kitchens stocked with free food, libraries with secret reading nooks, Lego building stations, and wellness centers. It was less a corporate headquarters and more a self-contained city, designed to keep its citizens, the employees, happy, fed, and productive, often for far more than 8 hours a day. This was a direct assault on the corporate culture of Midtown, the rigid, hierarchical world of the glass towers, with their executive floors and prescribed dress codes, felt a century away from the playful, campus-like environment Google was cultivating in Chelsea. And the impact on the surrounding neighborhood was immense. The arrival of thousands of high-paid tech workers transformed Chelsea from a gritty, artistic hub into the epicenter of Silicon Alley. Art galleries were replaced by upscale boutiques, old-school diners by artisanal coffee shops. Google's fortress of brick didn't just house a company. It radiated a new kind of economic and cultural gravity that reshaped an entire district in its image. The success of Google's model proved that the future of the New York office wasn't exclusively in the clouds. Value could be found in the sprawling, repurposed bones of the city's industrial past. But as the 21st century marched on, another, even more audacious vision for the corporate campus began to rise on the far west side. It wasn't about adapting the old. It was about building a brand new hypermodern city from scratch, on a platform built over a working rail yard. This was Hudson Yards. If 111 8th Avenue was a repurposed giant, Hudson Yards was a bespoke titan, forged in glass and steel. It represented the largest private real estate development in American history, a gleaming multi-billion-dollar enclave of super-tall office towers, luxury condos, and high-end retail. This wasn't the quirky industrial chic of Silicon Alley. This was a polished, meticulously engineered environment designed to lure the world's most powerful corporations, giants of finance, law, and media. With cutting-edge technology, unparalleled amenities, and the prestige of a brand new skyline. The towers at Hudson Yards offered a different kind of corporate campus. It was vertical, integrated, and exclusive. It promised a seamless experience where one could live, work, and shop without ever needing to leave the complex. It was a fortress of modernity, a self-sufficient ecosystem built for the global elite. So here, at the dawn of the 2020s, New York presented two competing visions for its commercial future: the sprawling, creative, repurposed campus of the tech world, and the sleek, luxurious, purpose-built vertical city of high finance and media. Both seemed unstoppable, both magnets for talent and capital, each pulling the city's economic center of gravity in a different direction. They were the twin pillars of New York's commercial dominance. And then, in a matter of weeks, a silent, invisible force would arrive that would empty them both, forcing the entire world to ask a terrifyingly simple question. What is an office for, anyway? The question hung in the air, heavy and silent, echoing through the empty marble lobbies of Midtown and the deserted plazas of the financial district. For the first time in over a century, the great engines of New York commerce had fallen silent. The daily migration of millions, the lifeblood of the city, had ceased. The subways were empty, the coffee carts were gone, and the magnificent towers we've journeyed through, these vertical cities built on the very idea of human density, stood as hollow monuments to a world that had vanished overnight. The Chrysler Building's gleaming spire no longer watched over a frantic Lexington Avenue, but a street hushed and still. The Empire State Building, once a beacon of hope in the Great Depression, now looked out over a city holding its breath. The Seagram Building, the temple of modernist efficiency, was a glass box of abandoned desks. And at the World Trade Center, the hum of global finance was replaced by an eerie quiet, a stillness that felt all too familiar and yet entirely new. This was the Great Emptying. The world's largest, unplanned work-from-home experiment had begun, and for a while it seemed to work. The dreaded commute was replaced by a walk to the kitchen table. The rigid 9-to-5 dissolved into a more fluid workday. Productivity for many actually went up. A new narrative began to take hold, whispered first on video calls and then shouted in headlines. The office is dead. Commercial real estate is over. The city as we know it is a relic. Why pay millions in rent for a vertical filing cabinet when work could be done from anywhere? The very logic that had driven the skyscrapers' ascent for 100 years was suddenly inverted. Proximity, the force that had justified every square foot of premium Manhattan real estate, was now a liability. Density was a danger. The future, it seemed, was decentralized. But then the experiment wore on. The novelty faded. The initial liberation of working from home began to feel like the isolation of living at work. The clean lines between professional and personal life blurred into a single monotonous smudge. Creativity began to suffer. The spontaneous, serendipitous conversations that happen in hallways or by the coffee machine, the very interactions that spark new ideas and build company culture, vanished. They were replaced by scheduled, transactional video calls, a pale imitation of true collaboration. Mentorship became a challenge. How does a junior employee learn by osmosis, by simply watching and listening to senior colleagues, when they're just another box on a screen? How do you build trust, camaraderie, and a shared sense of purpose through a Wi-Fi connection? The social fabric of work, the human element that had always been the unspoken value of the office, was fraying. We learned that a company is more than a collection of individuals completing tasks. It's a community, and a community needs a place to gather. Slowly, then all at once, the tide began to turn. The question was no longer if people would come back, but how. And the answer revealed a seismic shift in the very purpose of commercial architecture. The office could no longer be a place of obligation. It had to become a place of destination, a place that offered something so compelling, so valuable, that it could justify the commute. This sparked what the industry called a flight to quality. The pandemic didn't kill the office. It killed the bad office. It killed the dreary cubicle farm with fluorescent lighting and stale coffee. It accelerated a trend that was already bubbling under the surface. Companies realized that to entice their talent back, they needed to offer an experience, not just a desk. And so began the great amenities arms race. Suddenly, the buildings that were best positioned to thrive were the ones that understood this new reality. Look at the tower that rose just as the world was changing. One Vanderbilt standing next to Grand Central. It wasn't just a collection of floors. It was a curated environment. It offered massive, light-filled spaces, technologically advanced air filtration systems, fine dining restaurants, and an outdoor terrace with stunning views. It was designed for a post-pandemic world before anyone knew what that meant. This new philosophy forced the old guard to adapt or risk obsolescence. The city's most iconic towers, the very subjects of our journey, began to reinvent themselves. The Empire State Building, already in the midst of a massive sustainability and modernization overhaul, leaned into its status as a top-tier address. Owners of buildings up and down Park Avenue and 6th Avenue began pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into renovations, ripping out dated lobbies and adding the kinds of amenities once reserved for luxury hotels. State-of-the-art fitness centers, wellness spas, tenant-exclusive lounges, rooftop gardens, and conference centers that felt more like university campuses. The office was being reimagined as a hub, a central point for the kind of work that cannot be done alone in a spare bedroom. It was becoming the stage for collaboration, for brainstorming, for client presentations, for team building, for reinforcing the company's mission and culture. The office's job was no longer to house people for 40 hours a week. Its new job was to make the time people did spend their count. And what of Hudson Yards, the city within a city that we left on the cusp of this great disruption? The project, once criticized by some as a sterile enclave for the 1%, suddenly found its footing. Its brand new, amenity-rich, technologically superior buildings became magnets for the world's biggest companies. Why? Because they offered exactly what the new market demanded. A high-quality, seamless, and engaging environment that made employees want to show up. It was a vindication of the idea that in a world of choice, experience is everything. Today, the 5-day office week is largely a thing of the past. The hybrid model has won, but the office itself has re-emerged, stronger and with a clearer purpose than ever before. It is no longer the default setting for work. It is a strategic tool for success. And so our story, which began a century ago with a frantic race to the sky, ends here, in a moment of profound reevaluation. The story of New York's commercial buildings has never been just a story about architecture. It's a story about us. It's a reflection of our ambitions, our innovations, our anxieties, and our incredible capacity for resilience. These towers are not just steel and glass. They are containers of human potential. From the Art Deco optimism of the Chrysler Building, to the corporate modernism of the Seagram, to the defiant rebirth of the World Trade Center, each one tells a chapter in the epic of American commerce. They have weathered depressions, wars, terrorist attacks, and now a global pandemic. Each time they have adapted. Each time the city has been reborn around them, different but undiminished. The skyline of New York is not a static monument. It is a living, breathing organism, constantly shedding its skin and evolving to meet the needs of the future. The silent, empty months of 2020 were not the end of the office's story. They were simply the dramatic plot twist that forced it to find a new, more meaningful purpose. The great towers of Manhattan still stand, not as relics of a bygone era, but as powerful symbols of a city perpetually, relentlessly, brilliantly remaking itself. And as long as there is a New York, they will continue to reach for the sky.